I'm really, really excited and grateful to be here with my next guest because she is essentially my third sister, not by blood, but we have known each other for 35 years and we have been by each other's sides for everything major, and no real surprise. I guess I feel really fortunate, as I don't wish this journey upon anybody, but you and I have kind of really rode this journey side by side. And I say third sister because I have an identical twin sister who I love, loves me, has my back always, but she just was in a very different space than the two of us and couldn't really relate in ways that we related to each other. And through, sharing on the solo episodes my personal journey, I shared stories about Quinn and her being the person that I called in these really meltdown moments. And when we were preparing for this, I was like, do you remember that moment? She's like, yes, of course I remember that moment. And always, my voice of reason, talking me off, all the emotional ledges. And I really wouldn't have gotten through any of this without her. So she's here. I couldn't do this without her being part of it because she's very much a huge part of my journey, my story. And just having her to relate has been life-saving, game-changing. So she is here and she's going to share her journey, and then we're going to talk about our journey together. So welcome. Thank you for being here. Let's start with your egg freezing journey. And when we were kind of preparing to talk about this today, we talked about the different stages at which you froze. So I think that's really interesting to kind of let's talk and walk through that, because I think at very different times and very different times in your life and emotional places in your life.
Yes. Yeah, I joke that I feel like I was a trailblazer. I started the egg freezing process in terms of like relative to my friends, where now egg freezing seems to be pretty like standard. It's part of like everyday conversation, especially amongst our age group. But I was 34, almost 35, and was freaking out, as most 35-year-olds are doing, women at least. Probably not guys.
Well, that's been part of the conversation, right? That this burden completely falls on us. And the freaking out or really worrying is really lands with us.
Right. And you hear like the 35-year-old, like all your babies are going to be like have issues. So I was really nervous. I was single. I was on the dating scene, which is its own mini nightmare. Had talked to my mom a few times about it. And I think we were all both kind of like nervous about, like, it almost felt like I was waving the white flag and I was like never going to meet someone. So I'm like, I'm just going to do this on my own. And I have a very like memorable, so out of my support network, obviously you were primary. And then my sister-in-law was a really important person in it. And I have this flashbulb memory of sitting in the parking lot in my car. So much happens in the car.
So much happens in the car. Well, that's where we talk always. And what I was saying just before we started talking, that if we had a podcast of all our phone calls, it would be incredible.
Very, very, yeah. I'm sure very relatable. So I was talking with her and she said to me, she's like, listen, this does not mean that you're never going to meet someone. It's insurance policy. And that was such an important, that statement sticks with me. It was like you would invest in insurance for other things. Like, it is just like, what's most important to you in your life? I'm like, having a kid. So she's like, this is a no-brainer. And my mom actually paid for that round.
Well, because that's a big consideration, the financial cost. And when I was doing it, my options were, well, and here's a really interesting thing, and I've talked about this, is I have not shared this with my parents. They don't know that I went through this, and I will be sharing this with them, before this comes out. And that's sort of just a whole other layer. So the financial piece was really on me. And I know that if I had went to them with it, they would have helped me too. But that's a really big consideration. And, when I went for the consultation, the options were like a medical loan or open a no interest credit card. And they like sold it like, oh, get the points. It's so great. I'm like, awesome. That's wild. So that, to have that financial piece, not have to worry about that layer at that time.
It was already extremely complicated for me and emotional. And I remember feeling very emotional about it, but the money taken out of it really helped. So anyway, I went through it and my mom was there. She was the one who was picking me up, which had its own, and dropped me off. And that was, hard in its own way because I wasn't with a partner, whatever. So I did well. I think I got 14 eggs at that time, and it was a good number. And it was really, it was such an important piece of that part of my life, because then I could go dating and not have it was the first time that I separated babies from dating.
Wow. So prior to that, a lot of pressure in the dating.
Yeah,
and how do you think that informed your dating?
Having had the eggs.
Having not had that. Having first, before freezing, not.
So much pressure. It was wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I used to joke that once I did the eggs, I wanted to go on the dating sites and say, like, I'm 37/34, 38/34, 30, because you get this fear that men are going to be on the dating sites and be like, you're too old to have kids. And that would be a liability. And it felt that way. So anyway, it did take the pressure off. It felt like I wasn't then like rushing against the clock. So that was my first one. So that's me alone, single. I think that's very typical for most people's stories.
With your mom?
With my mom, who's passed, and she was always saying that I better have a child before she dies, and that, that was its own little, pressure. Unfortunately, she did pass before I was able to have a kid, but she's part of that memory.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
Those little eggs are in Indiana right now. They're like my little emoji smiley faces.
Which, is so interesting. I was talking to one of the other guests before, and both of us were like, we don't even know where our eggs are.
Yeah,
I don't even know where they're stored.
Yeah.
I should find that out.
You should find that
out. Yeah.
So those are in Indiana currently. So that was my first. Should I move on to the second one, or is there
I think, or, maybe speak to the sort of more of the emotions, because for me, and my whole story, I know your whole story, but we're sharing here with others, so much emotional conflict. And what's different about, and I've only frozen once, what's different about your first experience and mine is you were single, I was not.
Right.
And I think there was a lot of complexities for me about being in a relationship and having to do that. And, maybe you can speak to what it felt like for you to do it not in a relationship.
Oh, it was depressing. It felt like, that I was like succumbing. Like I was never, not that I wasn't going to meet someone. I think there was a part of me that believed it would happen, but it felt like depressing. It felt like pathetic and embarrassing.
Yeah. Embarrassing.
I would say so.
Yeah.
But I did have some friends who were going through it. I had a pretty a strong contingency of single friends, and I was also proud of myself for taking that step. And why I said I was like a trailblazer, not actually a trailblazer, they've been doing egg freezing for a long time. It was not popular, and I had learned about it I went to my gynecologist, and she had literally just come from a lecture by a doctor at a clinic in the town that I live in, and was like, have you thought about this? And
Which I thought was so interesting. I didn't know that part of the story, that she literally had just come from a conference. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I scheduled a consultation with him. And he had an interesting story, like kind of perspective on the fact that it is like a disability for women in a sense that's not funded. Like, the fact that insurance doesn't cover it is pathetic because it's aging. And aging is our fertility disability, which is...
Oh, interesting. I've never heard, but so true. I've never heard it framed that way.
Yeah.
Well, there is more coverage now.
Yes.
Happening, which is the good thing, but it's still a lot of people
not
don't.
for egg freezing. There is a lot of businesses that are in a lot of tech companies. It's part of people's packages, but insurance doesn't cover it.
Yes. You're right.
So it is, so for this one I had to pay, and for the other two I had to.
So let's talk about the other two, because very fast forward, different stage of your life.
Yeah. So that was when I was 34, almost 35. Then I met someone at 37, and at 40. I had an experience where I think it was this round. Maybe it was the next round. But I had an experience where I went to visit a friend who was around my age and was trying to have kids. She was married. And she was on her third round of egg retrievals with 12 eggs maybe each time, and still didn't have an embryo. And it freaked me out. I was like, oh, okay, so these 14 are not enough.
Oh, my gosh. Well, that's...
Right.
A fear for me, because where I'm now, and you obviously know this, is I also at 37 when I froze got 14, and Rob and I are trying to decide on number 2.
Right.
And that's the thing, and we talk about this all the time, the math and the calculations and the numbers, and what do the numbers mean, and what will I get, and then the freaking stress and anxiety around that. And now I'm doing that math of and I'm hearing you talk about this friend. And a 14, so how many embryos?
Right.
Am I going to get any? Right. It doesn't feel like enough.
Yeah. Well, we all become our own little mini scientists. I can tell you all the numbers now. So it was that time, I think. So I went to my doctor, and I was like, what do you think? She's like, 40 is better than 41. right? And so I made a decision and I was in a relationship 3 years in. We didn't know, was not clear what was going to happen. We were doing well, but it just wasn't like obvious that we would be getting married anytime soon. And I, for myself, and everyone has their own, I know friends who have done embryos with, their partners and not married. So everyone has their own perspective on this, but I felt strongly that I didn't want to do embryos, which are more stable and better for freezing, but eggs are fine too, without being engaged. I just felt that was that was kind of my thing. And everyone has their thing. So that was a real weird decision and tough. Probably many conversations between the two of us about like what I do and if I do this while I'm in a relationship. And that time, when I was doing it, I was pretty private about it. Like, he was involved, but I was like, this is my thing. F you, kind of. Like, I'm going to do this for myself.
Yeah. And I want to maybe next episode, because we're going to talk more about, like, the relationship piece. Relational, because we're going to talk about friendships, too. But, how, maybe that's for next episode, how to have those conversations, how involved. I've shared this already, but, like, I was really hell-bent on not having Rob involved because I was so angry and, like, resentful that he wasn't ready or didn't want embryos, but eventually allowing him to be a part of that process. But it's hard to know how much, especially in a relationship, like how much do I include them, not include them.
Yeah, I didn't actually I said F you. I wasn't there at that point. I just was sort of like, I think at that time it felt separate. Again, I was like, my relationship is one thing. It's not totally separate. It was annoying that I had to do it. But I felt like I have to separate these two because if I link them, each thing becomes way too heavy. Yeah. So I was like, heavy. I know I want to have a kid and I'm going to go down this path and like the visual I had in my brain was just like two parallel paths and I worked really hard to not have them cross and a lot of therapy too and conversations with you.
Well, I think that's what was harder for me is I completely intertwined the two and it made me,
crazy. Made you crazy. Yeah. So I don't know how I did. I mean, I did it through a lot of work and a lot of journaling and a lot of support from the people who love me and I paid to support me. And so that one, and he wasn't involved. He knew I was doing it, but I was really kind of made it my own thing. And that time, so I was 40 and I think I got 12 that time.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I was lucky for that. I know I hear all those stories of people not, it sucks. But anyway, so that would have been tough to do it and then get like nothing. Right. Yeah, but I was lucky. And it was weird. I'd be like, giving myself medication. He's like upstairs watching TV. It was just like an odd experience. Whereas by myself, that was lonely. Like the first time I was like in my little room, like by myself, maybe telling my mom about it, maybe telling my friends, but that was a very different
alone. Yeah.
And so that felt good. So then at that point I had 28 eggs. Maybe this is when I had the conversation with a friend because then I was like, oh, okay, so now even that might not be enough.
But that's always the question, right? What is enough? You never know. And I think there is, even Dr. Brower shared, there is more data and more information. So even more so than when I froze and you first froze.
So much.
But I think that, and I want to say, I feel this way, that I'm so proud of the decisions that you made and the decision to keep freezing, to get to a place where you felt good, because I think that's the answer to the question. Yeah. It's like, it's personal.
It's totally personal.
Yeah.
There is actually, and I don't know if I'm supposed to do this, but there was a website that I came across most recently in my fourth time. We skipped the third.
We'll get back to the third.
Yeah, there's this website. I'll think about it, and maybe for our next episode I'll bring it up. But it's this particular doctor compiles all the data. I mean, you can find data for anything.
We need that so we can share it with everybody.
Yeah, and I think though you have to pay at a certain point. I think if you read a certain number of articles, you have to pay. But
the more resources, the better. I think people want more information.
Yeah, so much data, and it's all odds. That's the thing. So you can do the math and run the math, but
that's the part too. It's interesting what you said too about keeping the two parallel, like relationship and fertility journey, because all of it is so uncertain, and then you pile the time, which I did, pile both, and it's like you're just exploding with uncertainty, which is just so sometimes unbearable. Yeah. Like it's like you can't hold it all.
You're out of control, and I think that's a big piece is control. Yeah. And for me, when it came to my relationship and it came to like fertility and that stuff, I had more control in the area of egg freezing. So I think that's where I put my energy. Not to say, we'll talk about relationships. You feel like you should have more control over how that goes. But you don't, because it's another person. And this was my own journey, and I could make choices for myself. And I think the other thing that I was also thinking a lot about was like the way that your body, like I think as athletes, we really believe our bodies are our temples. They're like the things that, I don't know, I just honor my body a lot. And so I felt definitely every time, like guilty, about doing this and like putting my body through the stress and fear. There's some, there's no hard data at all, but you hear these like wives' tales around cancer and this stuff, and my doctor debunked that. But there's a certain feeling of like, at what cost am I doing this? But
yeah. I also think as athletes and people that really value their bodies, take care of their bodies, and their bodies have been high performing for so long that, if it doesn't do well, there's this like real disappointment in your body. Like, I could have done better. It should have done better. It should have performed better, but it really, it doesn't work that way in this process.
No. I think that's funny that you say that, because I think that because it's gone well for me, which is not true for others, I'm like, wow, my body's doing it.
Yeah, but that's not, but that's not, your body has done quite well. Yeah. Okay, but let's go back to third time. We've heard about the first two.
Yeah, I think this is when I had that conversation with a friend. I think the 40, I don't remember what the precipitate, I don't know how I don't remember that. There must have been something that like.
There definitely was.
Maybe, yeah. I decided again at 41, I was now 4 years in with my partner, and was getting increasingly anxious about my future. And a lot of, actually, one thing that occurred to me, well, not with the help of my psychologist, which I think is something that is important. You need support through all of this.
Yes.
I was losing my mind in terms of like my future and the unknowns, and not knowing like whether I would, like, I was going down the journey of like, in my cart in Amazon, like raising a kid and having a kid on your own, should I read about this stuff? Should I start thinking about it?
I know. And, I've had endless conversations about that, and sort of these breaking points, these questions and these uncertainties take us to. And I remember, gosh, okay, Rob doesn't know this, but I will share because I'm being vulnerable. But I remember thinking, I'm going to have to leave, and where am I going to go? And it was the middle of the pandemic, and I'm looking up like apartments in California, because I'm like,
I was on those calls with you.
Yeah. And I'm literally like looking up Airbnbs, because I was like, if this goes down like this, I cannot stay in the state. Like, I will be broken. But having to consider those things and those options are really, really hard.
Wild. And you went to the psychic. Do you remember?
Yes.
I will never forget.
Oh my God, yes.
That was wild.
Should I share about that? I'll share about that. Yeah. So, but this was like, that's so amazing that you bring that up, because it's this quest to get some certainty. Yeah. Like, tell me something that can give me hope, can reassure me, can get me out of these like states of like sadness and despair. Like, talk about what happens in a car. I cried in my car more times than I can count. So I went to the psychic, and you came up quite a bit.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
And my mom.
And your mom, and your relationship.
Yeah.
And they describe your relationship really to a T.
Oh, yeah.
This woman so she's doing the reading and everything, and she told me a lot of like reassuring things. And one of the things she said is that you'll have 2 children.
To you.
To me.
Yeah.
And a year later, I had Dean.
Yeah, and she also, well, we won't go there, but like had some very interesting reflections about your relationship. And then with me was like, he seems defended. I think she's looking into, or something like, I'm getting the sense that she's looking into like potentially having a kid on her own. She should wait a year. Yeah. She should give it time.
Yeah. Yeah, wild.
I don't know about the timing, if it exactly worked out, but yeah. It's crazy.
I'm glad you brought that up. I had forgotten about that.
People can believe or not believe, whatever, but it was.
I don't know. She's well, you know what? Believe or not believe, I left there feeling so much. I needed it. I needed something. I was grasping for something to kind of ground me in hope.
Right, but that is a real testament to where we were. And anyway, so that was kind of fun and like interesting to think about, and it was validating that like, yeah, he's tough, he's a strong-willed person. Accurate. I was thinking about it, and I was considering it, not really seriously, but it was more about like, again, control. Like, I think one thing that we've talked a lot about is the role of being a, kind of like a high-achieving, high-performing person, someone who probably self-proclaimed perfectionist. I study it too, and so it's like, you're not used to not having input equal output.
Well,
right?
and I think everything that's within our control, and you know, you're very, I don't know how much you want to share about what you do, but you're insanely accomplished, and all the things that have been with, and we both have been accomplished athletes. Like I think in anything that we really strive for, we go all in, and then here comes this really huge part of life that it doesn't matter how all in we go.
No.
We don't, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, totally. So I think, should I move on to my next time?
Yeah, the one thing I want to circle back to, and I don't know if it was all times you went, but maybe the two where you were in your relationship. You're still in your relationship, and we'll get to that. The embarrassment piece, and you had shared that you would wear a ring.
Oh, yeah. So going into... I laugh, but I'll have another funny vignette about that. So yeah, anytime I went into the fertility clinic, I have this like ring actually that my partner gave me. No, didn't give me. Gave me a necklace, which I then traded in for a ring. I have not lived that one down. Anyhow, drove over another version and then rebought it. Didn't know if it was symbolic in any way, but anyhow, so I would move it to my like engagement finger because I was ashamed to be going into the fertility, like to get egg freezing. I was like, everyone around me had their rings and I was feeling like I was like this, like a leper, you know, like this.
Yeah, I felt the same way going in. I would totally judge myself because I would walk in and I'd see couples together and I would just, it instantly made me feel horrible about myself.
Yeah, it was wild. And then I actually, more recently on my, I don't know, I was going in for a consultation and I forgot my engagement ring. And
now you actually have a real engagement ring.
I turned around and went and got it because I forgot to put it on. I'm like, F no, I'm going in there. So anyhow.
Okay, so third time,
still with partner. He was I talked a lot more about it with him. He was aware. He was a little bit like, why are we doing this again? You know, I'm like, it's a numbers game, right? Yeah. And it was a little bit, we were having conversations about marriage, but it was, a windy, twisty journey, if you will. And I, again, was just like, got to do it for myself. A little bit more resentment that time around, I'd say. And that's why I think in a way I talked more about it was because it felt like you need to know that I'm doing this again because I'm old.
Yeah.
And
I think that's a piece sometimes they totally just don't connect with is that there is a clock on this.
Yes.
And this is why the stress for us starts to build at a certain age. Also, the third time that you went through it, you had a lot of judgment from other people.
Oh, yes. People were like, you're doing it again? Why? You should just figure it out in your relationship with him. And I was like, again, keeping it separate. Like, I have to keep it separate. It's going to make everything harder. And I will say I'm glad I did it, and we'll talk about that. But, like, you really need to figure out what's right for you. And some people don't want to do it, and that's fine. But, like, don't judge.
Don't judge. Yeah, everybody's...
And you are such an amazing, important, as your sister. Like, but I think we could relate on this a little bit more. Yeah. Just being like, you do you. Like, you've got to do what makes you feel better.
Well, and I can't say this enough, and I've said it to you, and I've already said it here, like how proud I am of you because, and we'll get to this, but you are in a really amazing, hopefully, right? We're waiting for more info. You took the control that you could with so much out of your control. You like really took as much control of it as you could. Yeah,
I will say, yes, I'm proud of myself too. And I think it is important to like be proud of yourself as well because we beat ourselves up a lot. Yes, we spend most time doing that. So yeah, that time I got like 15. Again, like feel extremely fortunate. I realize I'm sure there's people listening to this that don't have that experience and I want to respect that. So at that point, so now I'm at like 41 frozen eggs waiting to be something with it. And then luckily, I guess it's luck, I don't know. Yeah, it all feels like luck. Was engaged now, and it was in September, and we're trying to now we're creating embryos, which is exciting. Should I talk about this yet or
no?
Let's
talk about it because it's just this journey of single two times in your relationship, sort of just owning it. It's your journey, and now engaged. Now it's your journey. It becomes your journey together.
Yeah, it was really wild.
So speak to the emotional piece of then doing it with him, involved in creating embryos.
It was so freaking weird, right? Because of these past 3 experiences, it was so much easier. Yeah,
so the weight just must come off.
The weight isn't.
Well, we're going to talk about this in next episode, the friendship component and ours, and we'll save that for next episode.
So lightness, the heaviness that I'd wake up with heaviness, and this was just lighter, easier, exciting, right? Not like that kind of you're excited to learn what the numbers are, nervous, but it's not like this, right? And so this time around, went through the same process, which is a real mind F. Like to be doing it all again, and now he's part of it. And so, not really. I mean, he wasn't about to watch me do my shots. It's not his thing.
But then he's got a part. Now
Right.
he has a part of
Yes.
it, right? The responsibility, it's not these two different tracks
No.
now. These tracks
It's
have
merged.
merged
Yeah.
in a really beautiful
Yeah.
way. And he owns some of the responsibility because he's obviously got a part in
Yeah.
this.
I also was thinking recently, like, he's freaking lucky that I was, because he's old. I'm old. I mean, old in the fertility world.
Yes.
And if I hadn't done this, he may not have children. Like, I don't know if we're going to have kids.
I know. And I think that's the hard piece of
Like,
it.
lucky.
Goes back to, again, we've talked about this, like the burden falls all on us.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like, you're welcome. I did all this. I paid for all of this. You're welcome.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. Although now his business, because he works in a company that supports it, will actually pay for a lot of this, which is cool.
That's great.
And insurance will cover IVF. So I had to prove that I was infertile. Just 6 months of not having my IUD in. So yeah, now insurance is covering it. Also feels like this weird experience of like, now society's validating this process, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't have to pay for it out of pocket. Weird.
What a different experience.
So weird.
Wow.
Yeah, there's the money. Yeah, it's really strange. Anyhow, so
It's almost more, it's now it's acceptable
Yeah.
because you're with a
Right.
partner or you're trying to have a baby and it's embryos versus this idea of like, I'm trying to like buy this time or create this
Oh,
insurance
yeah.
for my future as a single woman or a woman
Yeah.
not yet married, etc.
yeah, actually, when I was the first time, I was reading a lot of journal articles because this is what I do. 'Cause-
Yes.
Yeah. And it was the most infuriating process because I would read these articles and it's like women who are choosing to wait to have kids. And I'm like,
Oh my
It's
God.
like, people who are professionals who've put off having kids. I'm like, no, that's not what's happening.
I think that's a
It's-
really huge misunderstanding, and it's not. Sometimes it's that.
Right.
Like sometimes
Sure.
it's that, and people are focused on careers. But hello, women can do everything at once, so we
Right.
can. But for me to hear like it was a choice, that's where a lot of my anger
Right.
came from. Because like I don't want to be in this position.
Right.
I didn't think I was going to be 37 and unsure if I was going to be a mother or not. Like
Right.
I didn't feel like
Correct.
there was choice at all.
Oh, that's
in
it. By like electing this, you
Yeah.
know, it's elective. Didn't feel that way to me. So, anyways, yeah, this time around was wild, and I got again like 14 mature eggs, which they then thawed the 27 that I had gotten from this particular fertility clinic. The other ones are out in a different place from my 34-year-old eggs are out somewhere else. And yeah, it's just the numbers. And like, so I've told you this, like, had a certain number fertilized, and then you're waiting for how many are then developing to blastocyst stage, which I'm sure people who are going through this process are way too familiar with. And then they grade these blastocysts, and then I'm getting them sent out for genetic testing. And so that's what, when you said we're waiting to see how many.
When I say we.
It's like even less so than my partner. It's like
We're
you probably
waiting.
know more than, because he is, you know, well, just mentally, he is someone who's like, it is what it is. It'll happen as it happens. So when I'm running through the numbers, that's my girlfriend's.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You know, he's not to say he's not invested and interested, but he's, you know, you have been, it's just a different relationship. And that's why it's important also, one thing I've read a lot about is like with your partners, and this can get into our next segment, but they can't be everything. And so like my girlfriends and you in particular, you guys are going to support me in a way that he can't. With
Yes,
this, and
yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to be everything.
Yeah, and they can't. And I think, you know, even I think there's this relatability across the board. Even women that haven't been through it yet can't, and men certainly can't relate to a lot of it.
No, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, it is what it is. They have different life experiences.
Let's talk a little bit, because it is part of your work, is the perfectionism piece,
Yeah.
because that's come up a lot in my conversations with women, in our conversations, and how that plays in.
Yeah, so it's something that they call it like research is me search a little bit. So I certainly grew up perfectionistic, and yeah, it is what I've dedicated like my career from a research perspective too. And yeah, I think it comes up a lot in terms of, we talked about control and about being, this idea of output, input, like that you put in a certain amount and you expect an outcome. But I think the thing that also is the embarrassment and the shame. I think that a lot of people, you want to look like you have it all together. Mm-hmm. And you need to have people. And in fact, I have made it a commitment to be as like open as I can about this, because it's real for a lot of people. And you shouldn't be embarrassed. You should feel comfortable sharing with the people who you can. Yeah. And we were like ridiculously vulnerable with each other. But I mean, we're like sisters, so it's
we were so fortunate to be on the same, well, I guess that's a fortunate piece of, I don't think either of us really wanted to be on this journey, but we found ourselves there, and we found ourselves there together, which was, again, I mean, I don't know how I would have gotten through a lot of those days without calling you and strategizing with you, and you talking
we have, like, deadlines to each other.
I know, accountability. So I think that support system is huge. And definitely, I have a lot of women say I have it all, and a lot of them do have it all, but then I don't have this. Right. And again, it's like there's no right way to do it. There's no perfect way to do it. There's nothing you can do more to do it better.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think though it is something that feels, especially when you have other things in your life that feel like they're put together, it makes it even more obvious when this thing isn't working.
Yeah, and I know for me, and I also know for you, but I'll share for me, is that there were so many moments, because this wasn't put together, that everything else, it just, I couldn't even see anything else other than this. Like, sometimes it was just so in my face that I couldn't see my career, I couldn't see my friendships, I couldn't see, I really lost the sight of my relationship at many, many moments. This is all, and so it was just so, so heavy. So as someone that's gone through this 4 times for, 3 different ways, because the 2, 40, 41 were kind of...
They felt different, though.
They did? Oh, okay. Speak to that. How'd they feel different?
I mean, I was further along in my relationship. I think that our, trying to figure out what our next steps were much more, like, in my face. So it was a little bit more difficult to do that parallel process. It felt a little bit like...
You had it like side by side, and then it's coming together.
It's coming together because I was like, why am I in this position? Why do I have to do this? A little bit of that. Yeah. I think I felt that way through all of them, but it was more profound.
I think that's a huge narrative too, like, why me? And then you look around and you think, and we can talk more about that, I think, in the next episode, but like, why you think it happens so easily for everybody else, and without conversations like this, or maybe a more public platform for it, you think you're the only one going through it. Right. You think that everybody else, it just happens, and that's really not the reality.
No.
Okay, so before we wrap up this portion of our conversation, anything that you would share, any advice you would give to somebody considering egg freezing, or even a woman that's done it once and maybe think about doing it twice, like, what would you say to them?
I mean, I like the concept of insurance. Like, think about what's important to you, and if having a child is, like, just do it. And do it early. Like, I encourage even some of my, like, colleagues who are a bit younger, who even when they're in relationships, like, just freeze your eggs. Like, think of it as something that you can have if needed.
If needed. And what's so interesting about that Dr. Brower had said, I don't know if I shared this quote with you. Did I share 15% of the eggs are actually used?
Wow.
Isn't that wild? Yeah. Thank you all for joining us, and please stay tuned for the next portion of our conversation where we talk about relationships.